In the last video, we looked at neurons and the structure of neurons and the different types of neurons. In this video, we're going to look at how a neuron fires, how it sends a signal to other neurons. And that how a neuron fires is called the action potential. You may have heard the expression before that you're electric, or we have electricity in our bodies. So we're going to take a look at what that actually means. We're going to look at how that signal moves down the axon of a neuron. And this word propagates just means to further or to push forward the signal. So let's start with a review of voltage. What is voltage? It is potential energy caused by a separation of charge. So you know voltage in a battery. If we think of the positive and negative terminals of a battery, we have a charge separation that's causing that positive and negative terminal. We have all the negative electrons at the negative side, and if you connect those terminals in a circuit, the electrons are going to want to flow to the positive side. So that separation of charge is called voltage. And we can also get a separation of charge in our bodies. In this case, we get the separation of charge by pumping charged particles to one side of the membrane. So we get an imbalance of charged particles. And that's called voltage. And how do we get that imbalance? Well, we have to pump the charged particles across the membrane. So recall from last unit, here's an ion pump, and it requires energy from ATP to pump those ions across. And then what is electricity? Electricity is the flow of charge. So in grade 9 you learned about electrons flowing through a wire, right? The flow of charged electrons. In the context of this unit, the flow occurs when charged particles flow across the membrane. And they flow across the membrane when these channels open up and allow them to do so. These are called ion channels. These are proteins. And when they open up, the particles diffuse in from high to low concentration. It does not require any energy. And then they can close up, preventing the ions from flowing across the membrane. Now the two ions that we're concerned with for this video is sodium ions and potassium ions. We have unless your neurons are actually firing, we have mostly sodium outside of the axon and mostly potassium inside of the axon. This is called the resting potential. This is the way most of your nerves are right now, except for the ones in your brain, which are firing as you're thinking about this video. And then up here, this is a sketch of an ion, and the voltage difference across the membrane can be measured. This is negative 65 millivolts. And we have more positive charge outside and negative charge inside. Now you might be wondering, why do we have negative charge inside? If you look at this picture, we've got potassium inside, and doesn't potassium have a positive charge? Well, it does, but the reason that the inside is negative compared to the outside, there's actually two reasons. There's some other molecules, negative organic molecules inside the axon, and that contributes to the negative charge And the other reason, which you may have to pause the video and think about for a second, is that the membrane, you know the membrane is selectively permeable, it's more permeable to potassium than sodium. So if you can imagine the ion pumps, there's no ion pumps in this picture, but you can imagine the ion pumps pumping the sodium out and pumping the potassium in, and there's still going to be some permeability. Or you can just think of it like the membrane's a little bit leaky, and it's more leaky to potassium. So some of the potassium is going to, leak through the channel. It's going to leak back outside, which is going to add to the positive charge outside. Okay. Sodium also wants to move into the cell from high to low concentration, but the cell membrane is not as permeable to the sodium. So because of that difference in charge, we would say that this neuron is polarized. So here's the resting potential right here. The previous image said it was negative 65 millivolts, negative 65 or negative 70. Now when a nerve is firing, we call that the action potential. And there's two parts to it. There's depolarization and then repolarization. So we'll look at each of those. In depolarization, the voltage went from negative 65 to positive 40. And the reason it did that was because the sodium channels open. And all the sodium ions, well not all of them, but many of the sodium ions moved into the cell. That's depolarization. Okay, so we're right here. Next up is repolarization. That occurs when the sodium gates close. So notice the sodium gates are closed now, and the potassium gates open, and the potassium flows outside of the cell, repolarizing it. That's why it's called repolarization.